Hey, my beautiful souls. Welcome to the Spatial Sarah podcast. I am on a mission to bring back the lost art of meaningful conversations that touches our heart and expand our perspectives. My intention is to create a space where you feel seen, heard, and loved. Each episode is crafted to hold that space, allowing you to open up and explore thoughts and ideas in a safe environment. So, grab your imaginary marshmallows, find a cozy spot under the sky full of stars, and join me in these campfire-worthy conversations as I take you on a journey to places you've never been and spark conversations you've never had before. Let's go. Hi, Jon. Welcome to today's episode. I'm really excited that you're here today with me.
Thank you. Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me on.
I've been waiting for this episode to speak to you because I've been really, really excited. I've been telling my in my previous episodes that and just briefly mentioning about psychedelics and ayahuasca. So I've been really, really excited for this session today to talk to you. And I think all my questions will be answered today with you.
I will try.
Cool. So tell us more about yourself and just tell us more about yourself and how you came about to basically how Fresh Mind started. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So we're based in Toronto, and I'm born and raised in Toronto, Canada. My background professionally, I've done some strategy consulting. I'm sort of business guy. I've got an MBA and spent kind of 15 years in digital media outside of anything quasi legal, cars and that sort of thing. So that's my background. In 2018. I actually moved into the cannabis sector in Canada, which moved into fully legal environment in that year. Working for a publicly traded company, we didn't actually have any of the cannabis ourselves. We were media and data provider for the rest of the industry. It was super fun. You meet some of the most interesting people that you'll ever meet, and no disrespect to anybody in the insurance industry or banking or something. This is very different. The kinds of people you work with, the kinds of experiences you have, the conferences, like it's a lot of fun. And I think, the part of that industry which was really resonant for me was that because it wasn't federally legal in the United States, all of the big global digital media incumbents like Google and Facebook, like they were very reticent to get involved, right? And their counsel was basically saying, hey, look, we're publicly traded in the US and it's not legal in the US, so stay away from this as much as possible. So it was difficult to buy ads. They would take your Instagram pages down. So a media company like ours, which was, not subject to US federal regulation, it was, the only avenue for a lot of those producers to be able to work with, to reach consumers. And it was a lot of fun as a result because we didn't have any roadblocks in our way that, Facebook or Google had already developed. It was kind of open to us to decide what the future looked like. So you're really shaping an industry while you're in it, which is a really rare and exciting opportunity. So it was a ton of fun. We were already publicly traded. We were running out of cash. We had to finance ourselves, and because we were already public and the cannabis sector had collapsed in public markets that year, it was hard for us to raise money. So we knew we had to sell an asset, and we had trade shows, consumer trade shows, like conferences that were the largest in Canada. They still operate actually under the same brand, and they spit off a lot of cash, and we were looking to sell them to finance the rest of the business, which was much more interesting, higher growth, expand to the US and really make it big. And we had an offer on the table to buy them out right when COVID hit. The deal was supposed to close February 28th of 2020. So not surprisingly, the gentlemen who were looking at the business, they were in Texas, and they called us in the first week of March and like, what are y'all hearing about this coronavirus? And we're like, no, nothing, everything's fine. Well, they took the deal off the table, and we were forced into insolvency, and it was quite sad. We had a real opportunity and a lot of fun just sort of snuffed out through circumstances outside of our control. So we said, okay, well, that was unfortunate. So my partners who were running that business, the CEO who started off in this little venture with us, and the CTO, he and I have been working together for now about 5 years. We said, well, we work really well together. We were doing some really cool stuff. We want to keep that engine going. Psychedelics was emerging as sort of that next, call it frontier capitalism. for risky people. And again, a lot of the same characteristics, very interesting people. The global incumbents didn't want to participate, so the world was sort of open, but also very different than cannabis. Cannabis is I don't know anyone's personal opinion on cannabis, but it's therapeutic, but it's not palliative, right? It's not curative. It makes you feel better, but doesn't actually help anything. This is more of a medical journey that in psychedelics, and if you believe in the science, and I certainly do, it's become quite compelling. Um, you're not doing it for fun, right? I mean, these are not experiences for the most part. Many of them aren't even fun at all, but they really are having a significant impact on mental health. So when we arrived into psychedelics, we saw all of the money and interest and conversation, publicly traded stocks were all in pharmaceutical ventures, right? Like, let's develop the next great pill based on psilocybin or the active ingredient in ayahuasca or whatever, and try to capitalize on what might be a $10 billion drug opportunity. We aren't those people, right? We're consumer marketers, so that we wouldn't even know how to develop a drug or little, it's not our world. So we said, well, if we're trying to figure out what the consumer is going to need in this industry that currently is illegal for the consumer and there's really no avenues, what does that look like in 10 years? Does the world move in this direction, and does this space open up and the science is finally accepted and sort of becomes mainstream, or does it stay, sort of off to the side? So we spent the first 2 years in Fresh Minds, probably up until about last summer, just trying to figure out what the business model was, and trying to figure out how we were going to, what problem existed that we could solve. And probably about a year ago, just by virtue of talking to people in the industry, we really zeroed in on the psychedelic retreat, which maybe I'll pause here and we can dive into that a little bit. And that's become the focus of our business.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks for sharing. Um, you did share quite a bit. So I want to ask you, for those who do not know what psychedelic is, could you share a little bit what psychedelic is?
Yeah, sure. So psychedelics are a range of sometimes natural chemicals and plants, like they're actually growing out of the ground, and sometimes synthetic, that all work. They all activate in your brain in somewhat similar ways. And I think the unifying factor that people in the industry would talk about is neuroplasticity, which is a term that basically means, I think you can think about it in terms of reshaping the neural connections in your brain and sort of allowing new connections to be made. So psychedelics, there's probably 10 that we track on our site in terms of actual physical products being given out to customers at these retreats. Some of them you've heard of, some of them I'm sure you haven't.
Can you name those? Are you allowed to
Yeah, of
name? Can you
course.
name those?
Yeah. So psilocybin, which is in magic mushrooms, which are grown all over the world. That's one. It's probably the most famous one in terms of people awareness. Ayahuasca is a root that actually grows I mean, it started in the Amazon jungles in primarily Peru and Brazil, with indigenous tribes. You can grow it elsewhere, so it does grow sort of all the way up through Latin America naturally. And there is a chemical in ayahuasca. It's called DMT. When you take this ayahuasca root and you turn it into a tea and you ingest it and you sort of mix it up with all sorts of different things, that DMT activates that neuroplasticity in your brain. LSD, I'm sure you've heard of that, and that's been around for a long, long time. That's making a resurgence as well. MDMA, which is ecstasy, it's known as a party drug. Well, that's making a big resurgence as well. There is a substance called ibogaine, which is the active ingredient in another root that grows out of the ground, this time in Western Africa, which is called iboga. Ibogaine Ibogaine is probably something most people haven't heard of, but may end up being the substance that crosses the transom most quickly into mainstream medicine. It can be dangerous. It can be toxic for people if not administered properly, and you can actually die from it. However, for people who are really, really addicted, like to dangerous substances. I mean, you think about the fentanyl crisis in the US and millions and millions of people who are dying from illicit drug use, very dangerous substances. Ibogaine appears to be the most powerful anti-addiction medication on earth. More powerful and more effective than any pharmaceutical product or rehab center, sort of regimen nothing comes close. So there is a certain degree of danger in taking it, but for those people who are really stuck, they're on terrible drugs and just can't get off of it, it has produced some spectacular, really mind-blowing transformations. And to put a fine point on it, in the US, maybe 3 weeks ago, in summer of 2023 here, Kentucky, so the US state, which very right-leaning, sort of red state, actually endorsed, the Republican Congress endorsed funding for medical examination of ibogaine and the impact of it, because even though it's this illicit drug and it's hallucinatory, the problem there is so bad, they really need other tools at their disposal. So they've signed on to start to introduce it for medical exemption. So really powerful stuff. There are some others. You can lick a toad, you can eat a cactus. There's all sorts of different things. They're real, and people are offering them, and they're actually quite profound. So
Interesting. Interesting. Um, what was your own experience? Have you done? I assume you have, right?
interestingly enough, and it
Yeah.
won't make me popular in the industry, not that much. I will fully admit that I see a business opportunity here, but I see, the opportunity to grow something unique in a space that is undefined. So for me, it's really more about the build. I have done shrooms a couple of times, but I certainly haven't, taken that journey. My business partner's a little bit more of a psychonaut, but I'll let him speak for himself. Um, in February of this year, in 2023, I went through Mexico and Costa Rica for a month, traveling around, circumnavigating the countries and meeting all of my future clients and just getting a sense from them what their problems are. And I was probably offered ayahuasca 5 or 6 times, but it's not a journey for the faint of heart. You can get very sick. You throw up while you're under the spell of it, and you really wrestle with your inner demons. And that's part of the process by which it allows you to start working through therapy. But I was like, geez, guys, I got a flight I got to catch. I got to be up in the morning. I got to drive home. I got to download a bunch of pictures from today. And it's never really made sense. But next year, it looks like I'm going to be going to South America for a similar trip and visiting 30 ayahuasca centers in 30 days. And frankly, probably at some point, they're going to get me. So I speak of it with great trepidation. I tend to be very nervous about those things, but I'm in the industry, and everybody you talk to is just, their lives have been transformed for the better. So you kind of have to give it a shot when in Rome, right?
Yeah, yeah. Um, how would you okay, so who actually goes to these retreats and why do they go?
Yeah, there's actually 3 groups that are somewhat distinct. It's typically Western, sort of North American primarily, some Western Europeans, for is the vast majority. Um, the 3 groups that go down, that first group are severely addicted to something, and like they might die as a result. So ibogaine sort of acts as almost independently. And that's not the only people who would go to an ibogaine clinic, but that's sort of the preeminent case for sending people there. There is another group that deals with trauma, right? They've got mental health issues. They're not, they may not be acute. They may not even be diagnosed, right? So it might be, I'm moderately depressed, I'm sort of stuck in my life. And when we think about that person who's kind of the user that we try to reach out to, they would appear as a middle-aged female, married, kids, high household income, pretty affluent, living the suburban dream, working a job, married to people like me, which is unfortunate for them, and just kind of stuck in their lives. They're just not feeling like they've got a lot of, what's the purpose of all this? Every day is the same, and just kind of blah. And what they will go down looking for is a way to unstick themselves. And psychedelics can actually play a really powerful role there. You might be working in talk therapy with a psychotherapist back home, but what the psychedelics do, they're not the thing that cures you. They allow you to access that part of your subconscious to start working with it much more readily. So that's why they go. It just allows them to sort of supercharge their therapy. And then there's a last group that are really kind of like, I want to learn about the nature of the universe. I want to talk to the trees. I want like a spiritual sort of, enlightening kind of experience. And they go as well. So very different groups with very different objectives, and all sort of seeking the same medicines.
Right. I think if I look at myself, I am probably in between the 2 and 3. But the main reason is because I want to experience what it's like.
Right, right.
Um,
Yeah,
I was also told that you gotta be ready for it. You can't just like go and do
yes,
it as if you want to get
no,
fun, have fun or what. You gotta be ready for it.
yeah,
Um, can you share
sure.
like probably the mental state or what kind of awareness we need to have or some precautions that we need to take
Yeah,
beforehand?
yeah, definitely. Yeah, you don't just show up and get started here. There is a preparation process first. So it's actually one that's taken very seriously by practitioners. Um, So the first thing that they will do is take you through what's known as an intake, which is very common in sort of psychological, when a therapist is starting to work with a patient, and it's kind of your history, right? Like, tell me about your mental health history, tell me about the things that you'd like to accomplish, tell me about, what drugs you're taking and all that sort of stuff. So they make sure that there's no contraindications and it's going to be relatively safe for you to go. And then depending on the center and the medicine, anywhere from a week to a month prior to arriving at the center, you undertake what's called preparation. And preparation means a lot of different things. It's detoxification. So if you are taking other drugs, pharmaceutical or otherwise, you got to clear all of it out of your system. They put you on a very specific diet that's going to make the physical experience of going through these journeys less taxing for you, easier to deal with. So it's really kind of around this detoxification of the body. And part of that, as far as I know, and this is a little bit outside my subject matter expertise, so I'm speaking from opinion here, but part of it is not just the physical preparation for what you're about to undertake, but it's a little bit of a mental break as well. Like, we need to cut off the bad habits that are currently feeding why you're unhappy. um, Change your diet, change all of those hangups that you've got. Just separate yourself from them so that you can come here and focus on yourself and not still be under, sort of the pull of all of these bad habits. So there's a little bit physical and a little bit mental in terms of preparation. And then once you've arrived, sometimes they'll actually just reconfirm, like, did you cut out all the drugs that you were taking? Did you stop eating fatty foods? Like, just to make sure that you're properly prepared. And then once you're there, you're ready for that journey.
Right. Okay. Um, so how long before does, like you mentioned, 1 month before, example, you got to prepare for yourself. So when does the intake happen? How long before?
Yeah, I mean, typically, even if you go to a website of one of the providers, they may have an intake form right on the site, and then you send it, and that sort of starts the conversation. So it is the beginning of the conversation, and you may not want to go for 6 months, but you'll do the intake now, and then they'll start to schedule you and prepare you once the time is right.
Right. Okay. I've heard of people saying that your body reacts. Some people they react really bad, like their body, they end up vomiting and things like
Oh yeah.
that. So the 1 month preparation, is it to help for those kind of reactions or
It minimizes some of those physical impacts for sure, but I mean, it doesn't work every time and it doesn't work in totality. So I think, depending on the substance, where those 10 psychedelic substances differ is, was it a fun experience when you're going through it? I mean, most people who take shrooms, not all, but most will say, hey, that was really fun. I was laughing and, I was seeing cool stuff. And ayahuasca is not that. Generally speaking, you will get pretty sick. It can be kind of scary and intimidating, and I think a lot of people go in with a lot of trepidation. I mean, when you hear the stories coming out the other side, it sort of validates why you would sign up and do that and go through that process. But yeah, it's not for the faint of heart and not fun. I mean, these are not things that, for the most part, people would even want to take recreationally. Like, there's not really room to abuse these things because it's not a fun process.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I had a very bad misconception perhaps about magic mushrooms because of how it's done in Bali and yeah, all
Yep.
these youngsters. And so I always thought it was like a bad thing and all. It wasn't until last year where um I got to know about ayahuasca and a little bit more about psychedelics. I think that's why I got, okay, so it's, I have also heard people talk about it and say that they really meet their inner demons. And I think it's one of
Yeah.
the reason why I want to do it. I want to meet that inner demon. I heard a friend told me that, when she did ayahuasca, she met her dad.
Really?
Yeah, her dad passed away, so she met her dad. So, and I lost my dad last year as well.
Oh,
So
sorry to
I'm
hear
like,
that.
I think that's okay. So I think for me it's also another reason because I think I sort of want to connect as well.
Yeah.
Have you heard any such stories? People, or what kind of stories have you heard, experienced from people?
I mean, so quite honestly, not being we call them psychonauts in
Yeah.
the industry, not being a psychonaut myself, um, when I went to Costa Rica and Mexico and I'm meeting all of these operators, the fascinating part of that journey was that every day I would have a meeting with somebody who I didn't know, and over an hour and a half, they would tell me about how almost to the person, how they went on a journey of their own. They were struggling with something in their lives, and it cured them. I mean, like their lives were completely transformed, and now they're working there because they want to give back. Either they own a facility, many of them operate not for profit, um, or they're working there, shed the shackles of their corporate career and moved from wherever to be there. And I mean, there's people from all over the world, to facilitate, giving out the medicine to other people because they just had such a profound experience. So I remember speaking to somebody in Costa Rica, who was actually from my area, not too far away from Toronto, and now operates this facility way up on a mountain, overlooking the Pacific. And she had had multiple sclerosis, which is a terrible, debilitating disease. She was completely blind. She was paralyzed in most of her body by the time she'd been dealing with this for 15 years and presumed she was going to die. And she was taking stem cell therapy, which I'm sure had a very significant impact on the outcome. But when she was in her most desperate days, I mean, she was straight laced, didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't do anything. She found ayahuasca and decided, what have I got to lose? At this point, let's try it. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you there's a tremendous body of science and data that says that this works. But she took ayahuasca. She's now in complete remission. She's fine. And she's been invited to speak all over the world in World Health Organization sponsored events. And she credits the ayahuasca for being at least part of the response. And my point of view is I couldn't tell you whether that's true or not, correlation, not causation. But if it's even 1% true, it's pretty profound, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that makes a pretty big statement. You meet people. I remember meeting somebody who was a record industry executive, pretty senior, knew all the bands, and, he was like a manager, and fell into drugs, and his whole career just fell apart around him, and he ended up going to jail, and he was slinging drugs on the street. And this is someone who was, very, very senior in a very important role. Found ibogaine, cured his addictions, and now is running a facility in Mexico because he's kind of like, what else would I do? This changed my life and it saved me, and I have to help people. So you really meet some incredible transformation stories. And I'm kind of a skeptical person myself, early days, you hear these stories like, okay, oh. But then you hear them every single day,
Mm.
a version of the same thing from different people who don't know each other all over these countries. It was quite profound. It's quite profound. The stuff really works.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm I'm amazed actually about this kind of stuff. Like I'm really amazed, and I think because I've also heard, like, when I listen to podcasts and all, and people that speak about it are not like ordinary people, like really successful, fulfilled people. I'm like,
Yeah.
if it's working and they are successful, then there's something that is working, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, Silicon Valley C-suite has sort of, taken the mantle here over the last 10 years and popularized ayahuasca and Burning Man and that whole sort of, societal component of this. And they will, you hear about corporate retreats where they'll take an entire executive team down, they'll all do ayahuasca together, it's a bonding experience. And I think one of the things that you probably find as a result of these journeys is that, for a lot of people where there's just a lot of anxiety all the time, you can't sleep, you're staring at the ceiling, you're stressed out, money and kids and all the stuff that goes on. Um, Whether you realize it or not, and I certainly see it in myself from time to time, it inhibits you from being able to focus, in your work or whatever's important to you during the day, because you're combating all these other ideas, these thoughts that are, sort of dragging you down in different directions. And I think to a large degree, what these journeys can help you to do is when the anxiety induced by all of these other thoughts can sort of get dealt with or remedied to a degree, it does really allow you to say, oh, okay, well, I don't have to worry about all that stuff. Mindfulness, presence, be in the moment. Like, let's just do this and not worry about all that stuff. And it just becomes easier to do that. So I think from a productivity perspective, it probably can help a lot. And I suspect these CEOs who are taking their executive teams down are onto something, to be honest. I don't know if everybody wants to sign up for that trip, but it probably does help a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. How would you your own experience? I also read your story when you submitted your intake. So I did read your story, and you did have your own story, um and you mentioned about accomplishment. So I would like to ask you, how would you describe accomplishment versus fulfillment?
Personal accomplishment
Yeah.
versus fulfillment?
Yeah.
That's a good question, actually. I think when I think about accomplishment, what we're doing right now is actually a pretty good sort of description of what the difference is there. Yeah, I've had some accomplishments in my career. We all have, right? And I'm proud of those things. But they didn't necessarily, you didn't walk away from that saying like, wow, I can say that in my life I did that. It was just kind of like, okay, well, that was fun, and we mission accomplished, but on to the next thing. Just there's not really a sense of satiation there. When I think about what we're doing right now, um, there is a fulfillment element. I'll tell you, I was interviewed by Sweden's national newspaper, the Aftonbladet, when I was at a conference back in April, and he was asking me a little bit about. He was asking me questions about the industry, and once he published, he didn't send a link back to freshminds.com, which is very useful for us when Google on growing our business and all that. And I emailed him and I said, it'd be great if you could link to us as well. I did, give you this article. You turned into a bit of a hit piece, tabloid, whatever. Fine. And he didn't respond. But the note that I said to him was, remember, every time you send somebody to me, whether you personally agree with this or not, I'm actually helping somebody. And I might make a profound difference in their life. So don't, you can take whatever political angle you want, but like there is genuine remedy here. There is genuine help for people who need it. So don't restrict that. That's fulfillment, different than accomplishment. That's kind of like when we actually work with people, and we make the right connection and they go off to a retreat. I know that 80% of the time that person is going to come out a better person and more in control of their own lives than when they came in. And that's actually a really nice feeling. And when you've spent a career slinging used cars or whatever else, I mean, it's a very different kind of paradigm and fulfilling in a very different way.
Yeah. I think the reason I asked you is because you also mentioned uh that you've achieved all this material stuff, but then it came to
Right.
you that it's not about the material stuffs anymore. It's about fulfillment. That's why I wanted to ask you that question. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely, when I think about what gets me out of bed in the morning and just excited to go, I haven't in my career over the last 4 or 5 years with COVID killing the last business and everything. It had been that long since I'd gotten something that just like, yeah, let's go. It's 8 o'clock. Let's get out of bed. Time to go. And I'm there now, and that's a great feeling. When you can be doing something like that every day. That's just you're really passionate about. It's rare.
I totally agree. I totally agree with that. Fulfillment. Yeah, I totally
Yeah.
agree. Um, so what kind of problems is Fresh Minds intending to solve?
Yeah. So what we found, we're going to dive a little bit into the details now. We're not the first, sort of website marketplace to be trying to, bring people to retreats. That's a concept that's already been thought of before we came around. And what we don't want to do is just sort of be the fifth or sixth provider of these services in the world. Right? This is, the world doesn't need 5 or 6 of these things. Um, what we've identified is that there is a bit of a gap in the service that's being offered by our, I call them competitors, but honestly, like when you've been competing against Google and Facebook your whole career, we're all friends here. It's fine.
Okay.
They treat this like it's an Expedia type problem. And what I mean by that is if you go to one of these other sites and they've got all the listings for these retreats, they don't really do a very good job educating the user as they go through this journey, right? They just say, tell me the dates and the price point and the beach you want to be on, and we'll tell you what's available. So it's kind of like booking an all-inclusive vacation somewhere, right? But this is not that. It's very different. This is, in many cases, better thought of as a medical procedure than a vacation. And, the user, I think about the user who's maybe had a mushroom journey once, maybe not at all, heard about this on TV or whatever, and they want to, see what their options are. They've only heard of psilocybin, ayahuasca. They don't even know what the other plant medicines are, and they don't come to the decision in the way that they need to, right? Really, the best way to start is to think about what's your objective? Like, why are you coming to a retreat in the first place? Are you just curious and you're looking for fun, something to put on the resume and tell your friends about? Are you really suffering from something? And depending on how you answer that question and a little bit about your mental health history and some other things, not all retreats are good for you, right? I mean, many of them you can kind of swap in and out. They have similar effects, but there needs to be some education and curation for the user on their way through to make sure that A, they get the best sort of bang for their buck. They actually get something that's really suited for what they're looking for. And B, they don't come away with an experience that fell short of their expectations, even though their expectations were wrong because they didn't really know what to expect. And then they start talking about how, oh, this is all just a ruse, and I spent all this money and I didn't get any transformation. And then, what the facilitators would say is, you probably shouldn't have even been here. You should have been somewhere else working with a different medicine under a different construct and a different, and treated differently, because what you needed was not what I had to offer you. You just didn't tell me that until you got here. So it was kind of too late. So this information asymmetry, the users don't know anything, and the facilitators know everything, but they don't have the opportunity to educate. So that's where we can come to play. We think that we can bridge that gap and educate that user, not in a deep way, you don't have time, but at least in a superficial way to say, here's how I should think about this purchase. Here's how I should think about, how to decide from the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of retreats that are around the world, which one's best for me. There's so many factors that I didn't even know to think about. Now you're telling me to think about them and then help make that decision. So we're building that out right now. It's going to be live, at some point in 2023. And my hope is that, the industry will see that as, we talk to some of the clients and they're all like, oh, it's a great idea. We really need that. I'm hoping the industry will see that as the best way forward for here on out for all of the services that are doing this, myself and my little competitors as well. It just makes sense. And I think that we're not doing a good job servicing that consumer today.
Right. So, okay. So let me see if I got this right. So
Sure.
if let's say I want to I want to find for a place to go for the retreat for me, probably to do ayahuasca. And then, so I go to freshminds.com and, and there I would have informations about the different, centers and the retreats that they have.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, we've got 100 retreats from countries all over the world that are listed with us today. We expect we'll be at 200 by the end of the year.
Right.
There's hundreds and hundreds more, but we've got a pretty good selection already to choose from.
Right. So then I just go and click okay, so what I'm having on mine here, it's more like Amazon. Like you guys are the Amazon. Like I want the particular product, then I go in the search bar, type in, and then I'll get the search result. So that's how you guys kind of operate. Got it.
Yeah,
Got it.
you might come on and say, today our experience is not that dissimilar from Expedia. It's kind of, the basic, experience. And so you may come on and say, well, I want to do a journey with ayahuasca in Mexico, and here's the price I want to pay. And then we'll return what results we have, right? So in that respect, it's kind of like shopping for a used car, right? I mean, it's not with much more depth. Now, the rest of our site, we have hundreds and hundreds of articles covering all sort of different aspects of this. So if you want to educate yourself, it's all within that site. What we're going to try to do is just bring some of that knowledge directly to the user while they're searching for the retreat. So, hey, did you know San Pedro cactuses, you've probably never heard of, are really good for a spiritual journey? And if that's what you're looking for, you should look at those retreats. So bring the information to the user as opposed to forcing them to look around for it. And they don't really know what they're looking for.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the centers that you have are the ones in in South America, and where else? Or is it globally? Or which region at the
Everywhere.
moment? Everywhere
Everywhere,
globally.
yeah. In fact, not too far away from you, we're actually somebody is opening up a retreat in Thailand. I think it's the first one,
Oh,
at
really?
least the first, at least officially the first one. I'm sure there's a lot that are operating and just nobody's talking about it, but they're officially opening up. So we're gonna see if we can get them on board. Our generally speaking, the retreats operate in places where there's a lot of tourist infrastructure, and the legislative environment is one where what they're doing is not explicitly illegal. It may not be explicitly legal either. There's lots of other little classifications. So, a substance may be decriminalized, so there is some risk, but it's generally a fine as opposed to a prison sentence. Some substances may be unscheduled, in which, the legislative environment hasn't even thought about them yet. So they're neither legal or illegal. Nobody really knows what to think about them. So, they're in South America, for sure. Ayahuasca is legal in Peru, where it's, sort of originated and is really important to a lot of indigenous tradition. All through Latin, Central America, probably in every one of 50 US states, where if you open up a church, a religious organization, you can get a federal license, exemption, basically, to operate a retreat, an ayahuasca center or psilocybin or anything, under the guise of it being part of your religion. So many of my clients are reverends of churches, and they're ayahuasca centers. I mean, they're just doing exactly what everyone else is doing. So it's all over the US, Canada for sure. Right in my backyard, we've got several opening up, some legal, some not. And then all over Europe, the Netherlands, Spain, Portugal, very much so. And yeah, South Africa, Jamaica. So they're popping up all over the place. And I think what we see over the next 5 years is, more and more environments that are conducive to retreats opening up, and probably more and more of the audience that we're talking to, those, sort of Westerners from, Northern Hemisphere, staying closer to home because they've got options that, aren't explicitly illegal, right on their back door, and they don't have to fly 10 hours to
Yeah.
Peru or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The people that runs the retreat and the centers, right? So what kind of people are they? Are they like the qualify? Is there some sort of qualifications that they need to have in order to have these
Mm,
retreats? Because what
mm.
I heard was that so an advice given by a friend. She said, "Oh, you." I think maybe last year it wasn't so much of a hype. So she said you got to be careful where you do, because some people do bullshit stuffs. So you got to be careful. You got to probably do it with some shamans or people who are really qualified to do. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it's the biggest source of what I would say is concern. I think that those fears are to a degree overblown. Um, Also, let me start this way. Generally speaking, nobody dies from ingestion of psychedelics, right? I mean, they're not actually threatening toxic substances. There are examples to the contrary, but generally speaking, your negative outcomes, which can include going the other way on mental health issues and, suddenly engendering psychosis or some terrible, maybe not permanent, but terrible outcome. That does happen. That does happen. What I don't know, and I won't pretend to be an expert on this part of the story, and it's, I think, an important one, is whether anything that's been done by the practitioners, either how they're preparing and screening the user on the way in, maybe that user wasn't entirely honest sometimes and
Mhm.
was hiding or unaware of some serious mental health problems, because they still wanted to take the journey, and then there was a contraindication there that wasn't identified. Um, there are examples of assaults, like physical assaults. I mean, you're taking a very vulnerable position with people you don't know, and you're not in position to protect yourself. So there are examples of that. They're, I think, few and far between, but they do happen. And unfortunately, you know, um, what's going on in the industry right now is that there's quite a bit of money flowing in. Some of the centers that are being built out are quite large, five-star luxury, 20, 50, $100 million build outs. And some of the smaller centers are not happy about that, right? Because they came to this very much with good
Mhm.
intentions only, right? Or, operating a not-for-profit, I only see one person at a time. I'm not here to make to make a fortune. I'm here to help people. And now they're sort of seeing capital change the dynamic of it. So they will jump on opportunities to bicker with each other and say, oh, see, you guys are not good practitioners because somebody who was with you last week, I mean, committed suicide. This is actually referencing a real story that I was just hearing about. I don't even know if it's true, but I was hearing about it. And, what I said in response was like, listen, I'm sure that happened and I'm sure that was a terrible outcome. However, thinking about this purely objectively with data, if you've got 100 people suffering from varying degrees of mental health issues to the point where they had to come down and fix them, and they're all there at the same time, the rate of suicidality in that environment would be astronomically higher than in the population at large. So the fact that somebody ended up there, not like that's a good outcome or anything, I'm not saying that, but it's not entirely surprising. And let's not immediately assume that the center was responsible or did something that facilitated it. It may have happened anyways. So I think that the challenge we've got is that in the media and in Reddit and social circles, it's so people are so quick to jump on, see, you're killing people, and now the whole thing's got. The reality is the vast majority of people going through these programs, regardless of where they're going, come out with a transformative experience. At worst, you're kind of, it didn't really work for me. It was kind of benign. And what you don't want is for those oddball stories from a couple of bad actors to get so overblown in media and sort of become viral and then just trash the whole industry. These people are a bunch of who knows what, right? Not professional people. You can't really trust them. Back to your earlier question around like, well, who is a good practitioner and do they need credentials? The short answer there is it's unregulated, right? So you will see people who have spent their lives dedicated to learning how to administer ayahuasca because they moved into the jungles of the Amazon and lived with the indigenous for years sometimes, paying great respect to it and really understanding like, how to administer, what all of the ceremony means and what kind of impact that has on people. You get other people who just sort of like, hey, this is cool. I'm unemployed. I'm going to spend 2 weeks in the Amazon now. I think I know everything. I'm going to open up a center and I'm going to start healing people. There is some danger to that. And there really isn't anybody to stop them from doing it. So I think, whether people are, come from the lineage and they're, shamans from the indigenous tribes and they grew up with this and they took ayahuasca when they were 7, or whether it's somebody who's, a well-meaning Westerner who's had their life transformed and have come down. I think it is important to get on the phone with these people after you've selected that you are interested in going there before you book anything, right? Like talk to them, ask them questions. On Fresh Minds, we've got a whole list of tons of articles about here's all the things you should ask a retreat before you decide where you're going. And they're the things you really need to know. So I think if you can get a personal connection, you feel comfortable with them, they've got deep experience, testimonials, you're fine. And you shouldn't worry about all these oddball stories that are floating around. I think they're very, very few and far between.
Yeah. I think I've heard more good experiences than bad ones. So I don't think I've heard personal bad ones. No, it's more like, seeing comments on social media and things like that. But that was the only thing that my friend told me, like, just be careful, just do your due diligence. I think it comes with any kind of stuff you want to do, right? Just to do our due diligence on our part.
I think it's interesting that just to fire in one last little point here, I think that as in Western medicine, there is a natural tendency for the practitioner to get a little bit of a God complex, like look how powerful I am. I can help all these people and I save their lives and they're so thankful. I don't know that that's prevalent in this industry. Remember, you got a lot of very empathetic people who have gone through these journeys themselves and they're really just trying to help people. But you do, as in Western medicine, get the occasional person who thinks that they're God and they can help everybody with the touch of their finger. And that's a little bit dangerous as well. So I think that's something to watch out for.
So is it safe to say that what Fresh Minds is doing, if I were to find a link like through Fresh Minds directory or whatever you call that, the centers are actually sort of qualified and they're all like legal, like they're sort of like doing the proper way. Is it safe to say that?
I can't say that with any degree of certainty, and I'll tell you why. We try to meet as many of the clients as we can, but physically meeting all of them is actually impossible. So we do what we can. And to be perfectly honest, when we meet a center, most of the time, most of the conversations I have are really just they're lovely people. They're really well-meaning. You can just see them oozing passion for it. Occasionally you meet somebody who just strikes you like they're nuts, and you wouldn't necessarily trust sending, I think about sending my partner on something, just for a journey. I mean, she's, from one of those consumer groups I described earlier. She's number two for sure. Perfect description. And, I think when it comes to those other folks that I wouldn't recommend her seeing, it's a very subjective point of view. I don't have any definitive data to say there was an assault that occurred here. They've been arrested. People are getting sick and coming back with serious problems, or they caught. We don't know, right? I mean, I don't have any of that data, so I'm going off of these subjective sort of. Well, I thought this was a strange person, but I don't really know. So we're in a very difficult position. We get asked that question very often. Have you personally validated? And I'm like, how could anybody do that? It's almost impossible until a problem actually occurs.
Yeah.
And you say like, oh, this person did go to jail. Okay, well, they're coming off the site, but until then, it's like you don't really know. So we try to stay out of that environment. It does open us up to criticism sometimes, but I'm like, if someone could explain to me how I could not work with bad actors and identify who they are, great. But until someone tells me how to do that, I don't know how I can act on that.
Yeah.
So we do have centers of all different shapes and sizes and price points. And, I would hope what I'm doing is personally building a relationship with them through Zoom. So to an extent, I get to talk to them a little bit. But I wouldn't say it's a screening process. We're not sitting there saying like, there's absolutely no risk in working with any of these people at any given time. I think, as with anything, there's a certain degree of risk that you take on whenever you're going to do one of these things. And I think it's important to know that.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
Sure.
Tell me about the psychedelic renaissance and what's real and what's fiction.
Most of it is real. We look at, we've actually had a science writer contracting with us from time to time, and she will look at all of the, the new research that's coming out and sort of paraphrase it, put it in layman's terms for the audience. I don't know how interested they are in reading a bunch of science, but the study, the data that's coming out now across the field, of all of these plant medicines is really profound. And it's a range. There seem to be impacts depending on the product and the thing that it's trying to fix, the ailment, that touch so many different issues that we all deal with, different kinds of trauma, OCD, post-traumatic stress disorder for veterans and people who are like in the police force or ambulatory and stuff like that. Addiction, as I mentioned, there's just this whole range of different problems which seem to be alleviated to varying degrees by plant medicine. So I think that for the vast majority of things that you're hearing about, I would actually say err on the side of believing it, because the science does seem very compelling and very much in one direction. The only thing that I'd say is a little bit unclear, and this will probably make me unpopular if people in the industry actually hear me say this, microdosing is the concept of taking just a little bit of one of these substances every day or on a schedule, so that you don't really feel the hallucinatory effects of the product, because it's not enough to trigger that. But you will over time accumulate the same sorts of benefits. So it's kind of a wonder drug, right? Like, I'm going to take this thing, I'm not even going to feel bad, and it's going to help me, and I'm just sitting back and doing nothing. It seems like the science on that is somewhat mixed. There are, I mean, I every day I meet people who are fierce advocates. They've done it, they've taken it, and they believe that it worked, and it was, transformative, got to do it. But some of the science is saying it may be a placebo effect, because it might be that you actually need to have this experience to cause that change in neuroplasticity. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not an academic, and I'm not close enough to the research. But from what I've gathered, sort of secondhand, it's a bit of a mixed bag. It's some research saying it does work, some saying maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So.
Great. Thanks for sharing.
Sure.
So my last question, I guess, what are the price range for an average retreat? Yeah.
Yeah, it's all over the map. So you get some very expensive, super luxury 5-star resorts. I'd heard somebody say in Toronto that they had flown out to British Columbia to one of our Canadian retreats and paid $30,000 Canadian. It was about $22,000 US for a week. which was insane. I mean, that's a lot. So it was 1-to-1, and it was luxury and all that. So they paid top dollar. There's centers in the Amazon that I speak to who sort of set their price at $100 a day. So if you're there for a week, it's $700. Includes all your food and transportation from the local city. You still have to pay for your flight into the country, of course. So there's a range of different options. And I've been to facilities where somebody owns a home and they just rent out one of their rooms in their house. There's many practitioners that do it that way, so you don't pay as much. And then again, you get your own private cabin or glamping, or even in a hotel, right? So there's a really broad range, and I think there is something for everybody, all price points, all levels of travel, stuff like that.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing. So yeah, how can one find you to learn more about Fresh Minds and what you
Sure,
do?
yeah. So when having this conversation, I have to point out that there is no E in our name. Vowels cost extra. So we are Fresh Minds, FRSH minds.com. Most of the people who find us actually find us from Google. So they've gone in and said, I want a psychedelic retreat, and then we show up and then they arrive. So that's kind of the most common way. So, but we're FRSHminds.com.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the website is all up and there are informations there, right? Okay, great.
Oh
Because
yeah, yeah.
I'll be putting in your website under the description as well. Yeah,
Beautiful. That's great.
yeah,
Thank you.
cool. So yes, any final words from you? Anything you would like to share
Sure.
for someone who is probably on the fence or thinking of doing what would you like to say?
Yeah, I mean, I'm that person too. I'm also sitting on the fence and kind of inhibited. I think my kids laughed at me this week. We went camping out in Ontario here, and there was a big jump, like a 30-foot jump into a lake, and all the kids were running off, and they were like, "Come on, Dad! Come on, Dad!" And I was like, "Nope, not me." So I'm kind of that guy, and I have some trepidation around doing these journeys. But I will say that for all of the people that I get to meet, whether they're a practitioner or somebody who received medicine, and for all the science that I read, take the plunge if you feel like it's something that might be helpful for you. If you sort of fit one of those three categories I was talking about earlier, I think for the vast majority of people, as much as it's scary, and as much as, that experience may not be a fun one, you end up having a pretty profound experience that you carry with you for a long, long time. And it's definitely worth it. So I'm sure thinking about it.
This whole experience today, speaking with you, I keep having this Japanese philosophy in my mind. It's called misogi. I'm not sure if you heard of it before.
No, no, I haven't.
Yeah, I actually saw it on Instagram Reels. This guy was mentioning about it. Basically, misogi, this Japanese philosophy is about doing one hard thing a year.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so challenging yourself really out of your comfort zone. But there's two
Mhm.
rules to it. It must be really, really hard.
Mhm.
Rule one. Rule number two, you shouldn't die doing it. So sort of there's some
Right.
safety net, right? So
Yeah.
as you were speaking about this, it's running in my head that this will be my one of my years to do thing, my misogi. Yeah. So thank you so much, John, for today, your
Pleasure.
time. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed our conversation today and definitely learned a lot about psychedelics and ayahuasca.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. That was great.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us on this soul enriching episode of Spatial Sarah, the podcast that brings back the beauty of meaningful conversations. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I invite you to carry the inspiration from these campfire worthy conversations into your daily life. Embrace the power of connection, open your mind to new ideas, and continue exploring the depths of our own thoughts. Share this episode with someone you know will benefit. Follow and tag me on Instagram at @IamSarahSammy, #CampfireWorthyConvo. Until next episode, keep dreaming, keep connecting, and keep embracing the magic of meaningful conversations. Signing off, your spatial buddy, Sarah.